Well, good afternoon. This is another version of the Just Jazz Cafe and an extremely special one. We've got a big subject to talk about, a 600-page subject to talk about, actually, the Jazz Omnibus, a beautiful book with many contributors from journalists and photographers, all in part of the Jazz Journalists Association. We have a number of my esteemed guests that are here online today. We're going to introduce them to you, let them talk a little bit about themselves, talk about the book, talk about this music that we call jazz. My name is Leroy Downs. I'll be your host. And Howard, how about you start first?
I'm Howard Mandel. I'm president of the Jazz Journalists Association, and I'm also the editorial consultant behind the Jazz Omnibus, which is the book that we're talking about today. It's about to be published tomorrow, and David Adler is here, the editor, Terry Hinty, who's our copy chief, Gary Steger, our publisher, and Ted Pankin, Ashley Kahn, Chuck Houghton, Willard Jenkins are all contributors to the book. And there are also 86 other contributors, 90 contributors overall. I think it's 67 articles and 23 photographs. And also there's a selected bibliography. And we're really excited about it. I'm so excited I can keep talking, but let me turn it on to somebody else.
Okay, Ted.
Well, my name's Ted Pankin. I don't know. I guess I'm not sure where I am in the book. I haven't seen the book yet. My copy hasn't arrived yet. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think a lot of credit has to go to David Adler, who did a tremendous amount of editing, and Terry, well, everyone who's involved with the book. I mean, I just had to select an article that I liked out of my archive of articles, and I had to submit three. You asked us for three, and you selected one. I think I'm represented by a piece about Sonny Rollins that I wrote in 2007 when he was playing at Town Hall was it Town Hall? Yeah, Town Hall with Roy Haynes and Kristen McBride. And I was able to go to the rehearsal and talk to them. And through Terry, I had an opportunity to have Sonny on the radio for 3 hours on WKCR with me for a full 3 hour show, which doesn't happen every day. And I was very happy with that piece. I've written 5 pieces about Sonny Rollins. It's one of the great things about doing this is that you have an opportunity to talk to your idols, Sonny Rollins being mine. Since I was 15, maybe, my sort of portal into jazz, I'd have to say, been a long time. And you meet them, write about them, and and I'm very happy I was able to write that article and all the other things.
I should say, Ted, that your article kicks off the book. This very up close and in person hangout with Sonny Rollins and Roy Haynes, and it's our lead-in chapter. It's the first article in the book.
They were very loquacious together.
Hi, I'm Gary Steger, and I'm the publisher at Simple Press, and I'm thrilled to be here today, and I'm really proud of the book. I've got a hardcover edition with the dust jacket, etc. And Ted is on page 11, and I just checked. And we started Simple Press during the pandemic in 2020, 2021, to preserve the voice and stories of jazz writers and great jazz musicians so that their work isn't lost to history. It doesn't disappear into the ether. And this is our 6th book that we've published.
Hi, everyone. David Adler. I'm here living. I'm a New Yorker, longtime New Yorker living in England. Long story I won't go into now, but it is nighttime here. So I'm really, really thrilled to be here and with all these, colleagues and contributors and friends. One of the things I'll say is just that this has been one of the various ways that I've been able to, stay connected to everyone. By editing this book and just reaching out to all the different authors and managing the workflow and I love the fact that we're able to do this. Howard talks about in the intro to the book about how different the scenario is today for journalists in jazz, for in any field actually, versus 40 years ago or so when the JJA came into existence, and then even 20 years ago when it incorporated officially. So though even though we're dealing with far less resources, less real estate in the paper, and or no real estate at all in magazine newspaper coverage, the fact that we do have this technology and we can make our own media in this way, and also stay connected to one another. And for me, living abroad now, it's been a godsend. So I see the book like that. It's kind of like, creating community and representing our community, and actually directly being involved in the community, even though I'm far away.
Harry Hinty, coming to you from the Bay Area. And I think it was about a year ago, Howard, that we had our first conversation about how about we try and do this book or collection of pieces by the membership of the Jazz Journalists Association. And as David was just saying, there's less and less real estate, fewer options for journalists, so just make your own. And this book, originally it was going to come out last year, but it just kept expanding and expanding, and really took on a life of its own, constantly adding pieces and reshuffling, adding the bibliography at the end. Of course, the photography was a whole separate effort, and I think it's come together so beautifully. I've read it, several times at least. I mean, the individual pieces I've read many times. I've read it cover to cover at least 3 times, and it really hangs in there. I think it can be read in that piecemeal fashion, but it can also be read as a whole big unit of jazz journalism.
Yeah, it did come together very quickly, actually. I think we first put out a call for submissions at the end of last August, or August 23. And so getting a book out in 12 months, 13 months, I think is, we've been quite efficient about this. It's really been a good team.
Mr. Willard Jenkins.
Good afternoon, Leroy. How are you?
Around beautiful.
Good. I just, I'm very pleased to contribute to this volume on a number of different fronts. One of which is the fact that, like Howard, I am a founding member of the Jazz Journalists Association, and I'm proud at the development of the Jazz Journalists Association and what the organization has been able to accomplish. The latest accomplishment of which is this particular book. And in terms of my contribution to this book, perhaps mine is a little different than some of the others. Like, for example, Ted's beautiful interview with Sonny Rollins. In my case, my piece is from the introduction to my current book, which is called Ain't But a Few of Us, a series of conversations with Black music writers. And, I think that I felt it was very important in this particular book because I wasn't one of the interviews. I felt it was important to give some sense of exactly where I came from and how I came to this point of having this examination of, shall we say, the dearth of African Americans writing about this music, a music which originated from the African experience in America. So I'm very happy to be a contributor to this book. And it's essentially, I guess you could say, my origin story of how I got to this point of writing about the music.
Hey everyone, it's an honor to be here and be part of this august crew of journalists and recorders and people keeping track of what's going on. Of course, I was hoping we would kick off hearing a little bit about the origin of the whole project. We've kind of touched upon it, but I'd love to hear more about those very first conversations because we are indeed in a time when physical formats, whether music or written, are fast fading. And I'd love to know if there's going to be a digital version of this However, I am very proud of the fact that I'm in this bound volume of coverage of a scene that is getting less and less coverage as time goes
Mhm.
on, and there's less and less books about it. There are just less and less books. What can I say? You know, um, the point that David Adler brought up, I think, is very important. The idea of community, which is a defining aspect of the jazz scene, always has been, and especially as the world gets smaller. But then, as COVID pointed out, it also gets more challenging, and people are more and more isolated as well. And I bring this to the fore because that's kind of the focus of my piece, which was a collection of interviews, a virtual roundtable, so to speak, with contemporary musicians who have decided to either relocate or to live part of their lives in Europe, primarily American musicians, and talking to a wide range of music makers, stylistically, generation wise, gender wise, as to what are the forces at work that are at play right now as far as keeping a career going, career building, career maintenance, falling in love overseas or getting work overseas or being able to teach overseas, all these different ideas. And so, whether it was like Archie Shepp speaking about, being tempted to relocate to Europe as early as the 60s, all the way up to contemporary artists like Joe Sanders, Greg Hutchinson, Michael League from Snarky Puppy, Melody Gardot. They're all included in this conversation, and I'm very, very happy that their feelings, especially during COVID, during the presidency of recent history, that I don't even want to mention our past president's name. But, speaking from all these different perspectives, I thought was very important. And it was a crazy historical period we've gone through and are still going through. And to, get a snapshot of this and how it affects the jazz scene, I thought was very important too. So to have a place for this, a home for it, that's going to live on longer than just a website. I was very happy about that too.
So again, just to introduce myself a little bit, I've been photographing jazz since I used to sneak into the Vanguard my senior year of high school with a friend of mine. And through no effort of my own and no knowledge of my own, I somehow managed to get Michael Ricci's attention at All About Jazz. And so I've been contributing articles as well as photographs for them for the last 20 years or so. And I can't even say how grateful I am to have been included in this book. It's taken me almost 7 decades to get even the slightest recognition for what I've been trying to do. And again, it was none of my doing. So Howard, I certainly thank you for reaching out and helping me be a part of all this.
So yes, I want to talk about who came up with the idea. I know that this book is broken down into different sections: legends, seekers, scenes, sounds, the world. So I'd like to know how it was organized and how we came to get all these people to come together to contribute to such a beautiful representation of music. It's not a historical piece. It's about what's happening now, contemporarily, from the minds of authors and musicians and photographers alike.
That's right. That's right. Well, the JJA had years ago in the early 90s put out a couple mimeograph collections of our members' works. And it was really just for us. We just passed it around, sort of samizat, underground zine sort of style. But in 2022, the JJA ran a Jazz Awards extravaganza online in a virtual space that'll never be repeated, unfortunately, called Sync Space Live. And we had multiple panels and activities going on. And Gary was a panelist speaking with Richard Carlin, who's also an editor of a press, SUNY Press. And they were talking about contemporary publishing ventures, ways to get books out. And Gary's model with Symbol Press to do print on demand, which means limited inventory. Nobody, they are really responsible for the distribution, which also goes through Ingram, the major book distributor. But it's much more economical, and it worked for us. And I thought when I heard Gary talking about this, why don't we think about doing an anthology of JJA members' works? I remember when I was a kid being floored by a couple of books my dad had. This Is My Best. It was edited by Whit Burnett. And then also there was This Is My Best Humor. And these were very impressive anthologies. I've gotten used copies recently of like 800 pages and major writers contributing articles. And I thought we could do something along those lines for the JJA members. We have about 250 members. We put out a call for submissions, and we got about 90 submissions, or submitters, rather. As Ted Pankin said, we asked for 3 articles from each submitter so that we could have some variety, see what people came up with, and try to balance that out. And then with David really at the center of this, and Terry, and Patrick Heinley, our photo editor also, and Martin Johnson and Fiona Ross did some reading also. We read through everything. And maybe David can take it from there, talk a little bit about the organization.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Howard. I think Howard, it was definitely Howard's impetus, to start the project in the first place. I'll echo what he said about Terry, just being so essential. Her close reads just blew mine out of the water, and she found so many mistakes that that would be in this book right now as we speak if it weren't for her. So it's really just it got cleaned up to such a high degree. I think Howard approached me because I had previously been the editor of Jazz Notes, which was our very modest kind of newsletter, snail mail newsletter that went out to members. This was I joined in 2001. I think I started doing that in 2003. And then that ran for about 6, 7 years of changing just getting a slicker format and really trying to make it work. And then taking it online finally. And it became JJA News, which is its current incarnation. At that point, I kind of handed over the editorial reins and just wasn't able to keep up the work anymore. I was doing that all in New York and Philly, where I lived for 2 years. So I had kind of a track record with the organization, and I'd been editing stuff in various capacities for a number of years. And yeah, so it made sense for me to get on board. Also, I'm a freelancer, and this was a freelance project, and I was able to just kind of knock it out, although it was a big one. It's what I do. So, it felt natural. It's a good fit. I like doing this work. I like, managing the workflow. I will take sole credit, I think, for the Seekers sounds, the subdivisions, the titles. I did come up with that as a way to, the first couple of things that we were contemplating just weren't working, and we needed something kind of snappy. And I came up with those, just those section headers as a way to just kind of really break down the material and kind of see where it all fit. Because it was all telling a story, but that story had to be kind of curated and crafted. And then in some ways I was a managing editor, just kind of sending out correspondence and, getting okays from authors and all that stuff. And so much can go wrong, in that process. And I'm just really exhaling that now that it's coming out tomorrow. Like, and when it came up, so the mailer went out, and it shot across the pond to me here in England, and I opened it, and I'm just like, wow, it's a hardcover. Here it is. It's kind of takes your breath away. I haven't written a book myself. Many of our contributors are authors of books. I also have to also shout out Gary for sure, and Sylvia. Just the amount of effort they took and the care they took at getting something really visually really striking and consistent and professional. That was essential, and to see that process happen was really, really quite exciting too. But yeah, when it lands, like not being an author myself, but now an editor of a volume. When that hard copy lands, it's like nothing else. And it kind of reminds you like why you did it. It's like, okay, this is a tangible record. It's like what is, sometimes in the online world, very ephemeral. I think the Nate Chinen piece is a rare piece. It ran in a short-lived publication in Philly, 215, I think. That's not around. You can't find it anywhere. It's not, you can't find that article anywhere but this book, except like Nate's private files. So, that's just one example of, what we did. And then the photos, that kind of takes it over the edge. And it was also something also that I was able to just completely bow out of and have nothing to do with, which felt really great too. So, but just that, I know how challenging it is to get that visual component looking right, because otherwise there's no point in including it. And, so it's really, it does look top notch.
David, we can't let you off the hook that easily. You got to tell us, among those of us who are participating in this Zoom, and those of us who haven't seen the book like me, where did we land in terms of those subheads?
Can I rattle it off the top of my head? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Howard, you want to? I don't have the book in front of me right now.
I've got it.
Get up.
Yeah. Well, as I said, Ted, the book opens with a photo by Andrea Cantor of Ibrahim, looking very somber and kind of prayerful. And then Ted's article on Sonny Rollins, then followed up by an interview that Michael Jackson did with Keith Jarrett. This is all under legends, and that includes the article that David mentioned about by Nate Chinen about Sun Ra, and Bob Lubenthal's look at Wayne Shorter's Night Dreamer article. Night Dreamer. There's a piece by Milkowski about John Zorn. You're interested in what you fell, Willard, and let me see. I'll find it. Your piece actually comes right after mine, and I wrote about Ornette throws great parties in the scenes section, and your piece, Introduction from Ain't But a Few of Us, Black Writers Tell Their Story, is also in scenes. So
all right.
It's the third section: legends, seekers, scenes, sounds, the world, and remembered. And then we have a 10-page bibliography, selected bibliography. And there's also photos, photographers' bios are listed, and the sponsors' pages. I mean, I should mention that this was in large part possible because we did get support from Berkeley Institute of Jazz and Gender Studies, from the Verve Label Group, which is Blue Note Records, Verve, and Impulse, and from the Jazz Foundation of America. So that's helped us to recompense our contributors, because the mailing, I've just been involved in sending out the mailings. I'm sorry, Ted, that yours hasn't arrived yet, and Willard's, but we put them on media mail. It takes a little longer than doing them express mail, but it's cheaper. And I've just mailed out 60 of them over the weekend, and they'll be reaching you, and you'll like what you see. But yeah, it's organizing the physical material as well as organizing these articles into a coherent whole. It's been a really quite an interesting effort, and I'm psyched now I can do a book of my own again. I know how to organize and sequence some of my own stuff so that it'll be coherent, I think. I should say also that Patrick Heinley, who's not here, sadly, our photo editor, did quite a remarkable job of managing uh, correspondence, and this was international. We have photos from Japan, from Romania, and to deal with the time zone differences. And then Sylvia Martinez, who is Gary Steger's partner, her ability to work with these black and white photographs on papers that will be individually printed for each book, right? This is what print on demand is. So they're being printed at different stations. It's not like they all come off of a press. So we had to do a lot of work to tweak the photo files to make sure that some of these very moody jazz photos in black and white still came through with detail. And I think they did in the book. And it's really a handsome volume. Gary, thank you so much. It's so great.
No, and thanks for mentioning Sylvia. She's got along with my nutty ideas and labor of love, and contributed zillions of hours to making these books a reality. Not being a jazz lover like the rest of us, it gives us a fresh set of eyes, and she's figured out how to do things like keep the photographs, have them live up to their potential. And as you said, the way the model works is somebody orders the book, it's printed and from the nearest printer to them, and arrives a day or two later anywhere on the globe. So there's no warehouse full of books anywhere. They're as people order them, they're produced. So that's going to allow us to keep the book in print forever, for the stories not to be lost. And made it possible to have this labor of love exist in the world.
Well, you guys speak about labor of love, which we all have. And I think one of the key words here is seekers. We, especially everyone on this call and probably many others, I use the word seeking all the time, because that means that we have the knowledge that we've already accumulated, yet there's still more to find out. And it's really up to us and many more journalists and music goers to go out there and seek and find some of these new collaborations, these new sounds that are taking us further in the music. I'd like to hear for a moment from Terry, who has read the book many, many times, like with a fine-tooth comb. So I'm interested in what's at the top of your brain right now when you think about the book. What articles, what artists, what photographs have moved you as you've gone through the omnibus?
Okay, so I was looking and working with this book in a macro and micro way, and was part of the original reading committee, and certain pieces really I never got tired of. So one of them, Leslie Pinchik, which I think is mentioned in the press release, where she talks about it's like sensory experiences of a performer, the zip of the bass case and all of these wonderful sights and sounds and smells that are part of a musician's gig. And I don't know, her perspective just speaks to me about the range of writing that is in this book. But as the proofreader, I really like a book that's clean. Okay, like when I do my personal reading and I find a typo, I just I flinch. It destroys the. I'm really hard-assed when it comes to that. So I think this book is clean. I think it's, the quality is there in the writing, in the design, in the presentation. It's really first class.
Well, that's
part of it.
Yeah, well, when you talk about some of the photographs, there's only 23, and one of our Just Jazz photographers, Jim Brock, actually has 2 photographs in the book taken in the Just Jazz series. But photographs are such a visual part, as well as the sound, as well as the documentation of telling the story. So I'm wondering why there's only been like just a few photographs and you guys concentrated on the text mostly.
This had to do with the submissions. If we had received more photographic submissions, we would have used more of them. We used two of Jim's. I think there's somebody else who has two photos in there. Maybe is it Michael Jackson? But we wanted to represent every member who submitted. We didn't refuse anybody who submitted something. We selected amongst their submissions. So, we put out the call and this is what we got. It's interesting because the JJA runs in the Jazz Awards what has become an international photo competition. And we get about 5 times as many submissions for that as we got for this book. So we can have 120, 150 submissions from international photographers, but they're not all JJA members. And this material was limited to JJA members. And as I said, we have about 250. I think of those, we probably have 70, 80 photographers. And so a quarter of them decided they wanted to see if they could be in the book. And that's what we got.
Great. Well, I know that one of those members happens to be with us right here, Mr. Cotton, and you chose a picture of Azar. So tell me why you selected the picture of Azar. I think it was Azar Lawrence that you shot. We can't hear you, Chuck. You got to take yourself off mute.
It on its own. Leroy, I haven't seen the photograph. I'm not sure what photograph is included. So I can't really comment on that. If it is Azar, it's because we're dear friends and I've seen him in performance about 150 times. But that's mere speculation.
He's warming up at Catalina's in the green room.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know if you're gonna be able to see
yes,
this very
okay.
well.
Oh, great. Now I see. Yes. Thank you, Howard. So,
Yeah.
well, I'm thrilled that one's in there because after photographing musicians on stage for years, I thought, you know what, some of these non-performance moments capture a little something about, what it really means to devote yourself to this music.
Yeah.
Whether that's waking up at 4:30 in the morning to catch a plane or rehearsing, warming up before a show. So
Sure.
that's certainly, yes, I'm thrilled that's the photograph that's in there.
Yeah, well, you talk about some of these special moments. As Terry mentioned about even Leslie, even the zip of bass case. I mean, all of these things are essential, and a lot of those private and personal moments don't really get captured. So it's really great to capture some of these moments backstage because it's a quiet time. It's when musicians are becoming one with their instrument or thinking about not just necessarily about their performance. They're thinking about things that are in their life, things that they're going to express through their sound. Yes, when you go out on stage and the lights are on, you turn into the artist that you are. But there are many different aspects that form these artists, and to capture some of those special moments like that are important. Of course, the shots from the stage are what thrill the world when we get a chance to see some of those major shots like that. That is a shot from Jim Brock of Audra Day, and really, really special. These are moments in time, and that's what we have in jazz always are moments in time. And I know that one of the things that we all know are these vibrations that live within us. We were there. So if anyone talks about a concert that we saw 20 years ago, instantly we can go back, get those vibrations inside of our bodies and call up those things that we remember about those performances, which is why I always tell folks that going out to see live music, you wear it home. It's important to get that. It's great to hear it on the radio, which is lovely, but you don't really get that total intimate feeling and hear the stories from the artists unless you're actually there. And if you're there as an author, if you're there as a journalist and a writer and a photographer, we are the ones that capture some of these moments. I've written many articles myself, but maybe I can call myself a cheater. I don't know. But when I'm there, I'm being fed information through the music. I cannot go home and write the article. I have to write it there, and full sentences are coming to me while the music is playing. So I'm sitting here scribbling out full sentences, just trying to keep up with this information flow that's coming to me. I can go fix it up later, but that's the nexus, man. That is the moment in time and the things that, you know, we have to express to the world. Mr. Ashley, I know you contributed and you got a chance to have a roundtable talk with generations of artists. You know, you mentioned Archie Shepp from the old school, and you mentioned some newer artists as well. In your thoughts and perspective about just the consciousness that streams across that age and that time span with presenting music or living the life of a musician, what, I don't want to say can you conclude, but what can you offer us in terms of the contribution of many thoughts from a span of age and time of musicians in this music?
That's a big question, Leroy.
I like the question big, baby.
But I get what you're saying, and you know what comes to my mind first, and what really speaks to the value of this entire project, is that I love jazz writing as a historian, as someone who has primarily written about jazz history more than contemporary, so at least in book form. I've found that. You know, compendiums, anthologies of writing from a certain point of view at a certain point of time is incredibly valuable. So, readings, let's say Dan Morgenstern defending Wes Montgomery while he was still with us, you know, at the height of his popularity in the 60s, when he was being kind of nailed to the cross because he was being so successful, and he was being taken to task by a lot of purists for his very polished sound and string sections, etc. You know what Creed Taylor had wrought, but you know there's a value to reading in that moment. You know what was going on, what was happening. And then there's this wonderful series called Jazz Masters of the 20s, of the 30s, of the 40s. And I think it ends in the 60s, so there never was any Jazz Masters of the 70s. But different, you know, leading lights in the jazz journalism field of the time, Joe Goldberg, Martin Williams, Ira Gittler, each one of them took on the task of creating one of those volumes. And I love that series. And I see this as a continuation of that. You know, it's not just one writer. We've got the advantage of 90 different voices, you know, in this volume. But that idea of getting some sort of collective truth that comes out of this snapshot of a time period. And I don't, other than, let's say, you know, Nate Shanen's book on the 21st century, you know, kind of an overview of what's happened, you know, since you know, the new century began. I don't see much out there as far as this kind of depth and breadth. And so, you know, I just want to congratulate Howard and the whole team, David, Terry, etc., Gary, for having the foresight to put this together and bring it out.
I haven't counted, but there's a number of pieces in the book that are from Jazz Times that are, and that's another kind of purpose that I feel like the volume serves as, you know, chronic, you know, collecting some of that material, because Jazz Times was my home really in jazz journalism for many, many years. And my pieces from Jazz Times in the book on Michelle and Cello. But that was a precious, Jazz Times was a precious resource that we could not afford to lose in the jazz community, and we lost it. There's talk of a new owner, and who knows what the future might hold. But and for a time, the online archive actually went away, and it was just kind of horrifying. But now, we did select a number of pieces from Jazz Times, and I'll just say that my first opportunity at Jazz Times was thanks to Mr. Ashley Kahn. It was a profile of Hank Jones, and Ashley recommended me for that assignment and got me, in the door to a magazine that I was with for many years after that and wrote many pieces for them. And it's meant a lot. And then I think back to just those experiences of I have to pinch myself sometimes that I was sitting in a hotel room with Hank Jones at one point, and he's in a bathrobe, and I'm interviewing him, and it's surreal to me, some of the people that I've met and some of the experiences I've had um, doing what we do. And so that was, one of my own motivations in being involved in the project was to, just kind of pick through my own past and then kind of consider everyone else's, in relation to mine. And, I loved reading Willard's piece and how, that autobiographical journey through his, upbringing as a journalist and just as a man. So, that was beautiful too. I'm rambling, but that's kind of what this is. So, but I'll stop now. Thank you. Thank you.
What periodicals are covered in the book?
There's a large range of periodicals that were drawn from, but also people's individual publications, their own blogs and platforms. I mean, there are several books that are excerpted, such as your own, Dorothy Longo's memoirs of Mike Longo, Ellen Johnson's work on the vocal music of Charles Mingus,
Mark Stryker's book.
Mark Stryker's book on Made in Detroit, Deanna Witkowski's book on Mary Lou Williams. So those were all drawn from publications. It was rare to have those excerpts, but many of them, I mean, Downbeat is represented. I think there's an article from Jazz Is. Did somebody use The Wire? I can't say that I was really focused on looking at where the pieces came from so much as trying to see that there was a certain amount of balance of what we were covering, that there were some people represented who really, have an impact on the last 20 years of the music, and that we had writers who had dealt with them or photographers who had dealt with them. We wanted to get them in. We wanted to see if we could get the widest diversity of our members contributing and represent internationalism as well as localism in a big way. I think we did a lot of that. I mean, there's some areas that we didn't quite penetrate. And I mentioned some of the things that we didn't cover that seemed really big to me in my introduction. But this is not supposed to be a historical, comprehensive view of the last 20 years. Rather, it's kind of an overviewed survey of the kinds of things that got covered. And, it would be nice if we could do a second volume, because the material is out there, and we would certainly be filling some of the gaps that, exist. I heard Myra Melford Trio M 2 nights ago, and I was so embarrassed that Myra, who I think is one of the major voices of jazz in the last 20 years, isn't in the book anywhere. Oh my gosh. And then I thought of all the other people who also didn't get in here, it's Harriet Tubman, who we heard out in Monterey, really great, free, heavy metal funk band. We should have something like that.
But you can. It's kind of impossible. It's like someone asking, and I get this question all the time, as I'm sure you all do too. Oh, well, who your favorite jazz? Who your top 3? I'm like, I cannot do that, because as soon as I mention one name, I've already disrespected the other 1,000 that I love. So
exactly.
all I can do is offer you some suggestions or offer you to listen to the radio show. I can give you things so that you can make these determinations for yourself. But, you know, in terms of these competitions or pitting someone against each other, it doesn't work like that, man. It's amalgamation of sound, texture, color, genre, culture. And that's what creates this beautiful blossom of music that we have. Mr. Jenkins, so, you know, I
Yes,
want to
sir.
hear about your perspective. You know, ain't but a few of us left. It's probably a very a true title for our book and, you know, what's happening on our scene. And, you know, you come from a different perspective and how you approach and look at this music, you know. So I want to know how how you look at the world when you're listening to music and what makes you write in the fabric that you write and your contribution.
Well, I'm curious that you made the remark that I come from a different perspective. What's your sense of that perspective?
Well, that sense of your perspective is you and I are, you know, we're different shades of another color. And I know mostly when we talk about authors and critics and things like that, they have a way of writing. But I'm assuming, and maybe I shouldn't do that, that maybe you, like me, you might have a different perspective from where you look at the music. And if that's the case, I wanted to hear what that was.
Well, you know, I look at the music from a variety of different perspectives because I've had the privilege of being a broadcaster for 50 years now, doing weekly radio jazz broadcasting. Still do here in DC at WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington. And I've had the privilege of wearing a number of different hats in working within this music. And so I always have to take those various stations into account when I'm writing about the music. You know, writing about the music has been like a foundation for me. That's where it started. That's where my involvement in this music as a kind of a lay person, non-musician, started as a writer. And then came broadcasting, and then came presenting and curating and whatnot. So those various different elements all play a role in my perspective on the music. Because while I may be sitting at a performance, enjoying the performance, and perhaps contemplating writing about it, maybe even taking notes, you know, I'm also examining how that particular band or that particular artist that I'm experiencing might be of interest in my work as a festival curator. So, and then I'm also taking into account, well, you know, how is that particular person's music going to reflect on my broadcasting? So there are a variety of different perspectives that I come from. I appreciate having that kind of sensibility and bringing that kind of sensibility to how I approach the music.
I can appreciate that. I think both you and I share broadcasting, writing, and curating the same exact way. I got 30 in, you got 50, so I'm bowing down. But one of the other writers and contributors to this book is Ted, and you wrote about Sonny Rollins, who's, you know, one of the great masters of our time. And I want to know why you decided to choose Sonny, probably something that you've already written before. And you know, there's these legacies and legends like Sonny Rollins, and then there's all this music that's contemporary that's happening now. And you put out an article on Sonny, so I would like you to expand about your time with him and how that moved you to select the article.
I chose that particular article. As I think I said at the top, that's one of 4 or 5 feature print articles that I've had a chance to write about the maestro, and it was hard to choose. I guess I chose that one because it involved Roy Haynes too. It involved this real-time conversation was such an interesting event. And because I had the chance to interact with him on the radio. So it was probably more vivid journalism than my other pieces. The first one was a very long sort of appreciation that he liked and his wife Lucille liked, which she didn't like very many pieces on Sonny, as Terry can attest to. So that may have made him a little more favorably disposed towards me, perhaps. I wrote about him right after Lucille died, and after the collapse of the World Trade Center. He lived a few blocks from there. And so the circumstances that brought him to Berkeley to play the concert a few days after that, that was a very moving piece. He was reflective about philosophical, incredibly impressive. I did a piece for Downbeat where he reviewed all the pieces that had been done about him in Downbeat, with the exception of the ones I did, and talked about them from his current perspective. That was also very interesting. And then the honor of honors was being asked to write the liner notes for Roadshows Volume 4, which I think is the last of the roadshows up to this point. And, if he hadn't paid so well, I might not have cashed the check. But instead I took a photograph of it.
You got the
because it was also an extremely generous fee. Writing about legends is interesting. I'm also like Ashley, I have an historical perspective on jazz. I've transcribed, for example, a lot of the oral histories for the Institute of Jazz Studies. I transcribed about 100 interviews for Stanley Crouch's Charlie Parker book, interviews about Bird. I transcribed a lot of interviews for Arthur Taylor, who I got to know on WKCR, engineering what we call the musician show. He would interview somebody. We got to be friendly that way. Other things like that, and then my own interviews on WKCR in New York, as Ashley can attest to, also having being an alumnus of KCR. You have the opportunity of your home audience is New York. You never know who's listening to you. And if you do something that people like, they wind up calling you, and word gets around. And so I had the opportunity over the years to interview, let's start with Ed Blackwell, Chris Anderson, long shows, 3 to 5 to 6 hour shows. And I'm going to forget people. But Ahmad Jamal several times came up and was with me in the studio 5 hours selecting his stuff. Benny Golson spent one of those shows with me, and a musician show. Art Farmer spent 2 Sundays with me consecutively. Paul Motion did a lot of shows with me. A lot of people. It sounds. I don't want to sound. I don't want to sound overbearing talking about it, but there was something about linking the history of jazz with what's in the moment that became, I'd say, somewhat inbred in me just through the process of doing these shows and learning how to interview people in real time. Like if you have Anthony Braxton on your show, let's say for a couple of 3 hour shows, and you wind up talking to Braxton in his vocabulary, all of a sudden you say, wow, what am I doing? Or someone like Professor George Lewis, let's say, or Benny Golson. It's quite an experience doing a journalistic radio show like that in New York, where you're endeavoring to document what's going on in any given week. And for a while, I was able to do maybe 3-4 shows a week because things were kind of loose at WKCR. And I did it for 23 years, from 1985 to 2008, when the students decided that I wasn't an alumnus of Columbia, so it was 86. I got 86, as it were. So that's so in dealing with legends, Roy Haynes, for example, he did one of these Sundays, and I was playing him with Train in 1963, and it's 15 minutes, and he said he was driving his convertible through Manhattan, top down, blasting it while he was coming up to the station. It's fun, it's fun to have to get involved with it to that extent. And WKCR also did birthday broadcasts every year, thanks to the extraordinary broadcaster and historian and public intellectual Phil Schaap, who set a very high standard that you had to live up to somewhat. I have a blog. I've only done one book, and it was through Gary, Phil Woods' autobiography, which I edited and worked on with Phil. But I have a blog with about 300 different selections on it that includes pieces, complete interviews. It's an archive. And so, I try to make up, I try to propagate my historical, my interest in linking the historical with the contemporary that way.
Yeah, that's important to do. Gary, I saw that you were motivated to grab some stuff from your library. Want to
It's
hear
going to
what
show the Phil Woods book.
I have the Phil Woods book, which
Gary.
this was our first book right out of the chute, and it was Jazz Book of the Year from the Jazz Journalists Association, which was quite a thrill and an honor. And we've published a book of remembrances and philosophies of life and music by Dave Liebman and Richie Byrack, and Dan Willette's collection of writing about jazz and related music, and most recently a book about American guitar music by Joel Harrison. This is all just rooted in my frustration that there's not been a venue. I met the editor of Downbeat for the first time at the Detroit Jazz Festival recently, and I said, I've been a paying subscriber for about 40 years, not actually, it's closer to 50 years. And as we mentioned, the outlets for journalism have disappeared. I saw Branford Marsalis' quartet at Smoke in New York a couple of weeks ago. It was absolutely extraordinary to hear arguably one of the greatest bands that's ever existed playing in a room with 50 seats. And did the New York Times cover it? No. But then you think about it, does the New York Times cover anything related to this music we love and care about? And part of the impetus for Right. And part of the impetus for Symbol Press was knowing that Phil Woods, who I had a friendly relationship with, had this autobiography kicking around that Ted had helped out with, and no one was interested in it. And I knew that my friend Jimmy Heath had a fabulous autobiography that he poured his heart and sweat into, and it went out of print, and he was being forced to pay $25 a copy for his own book.
I think Benny Golson's might be out of print now too.
Right. And it's unconscionable. So, and I was talking to people like Freddie Cole, who had ideas for a book, and sadly never happened. And just trying to figure out a way to use the modern technology that allows us to be nimble and low risk and give voice to these great men and women who have given so much to all of us, who have enriched our lives in so many ways. And I'm on the hunt constantly for more diverse voices and projects that I would love to have people pursue or publish their own art and journalism. And they can reach out to me at Gary at symbolpress.com. But I really think it's important for not just the notes to be with us forever, but the backstory to how and why those notes exist.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, this is the 21st century, and that is why all of these different platforms exist, like Just Jazz TV, for instance. You talk about the New York Times and the LA Times. It's very interesting when they come out and write an article about jazz in my town. They send, what do they get an accountant from down the hall and say, hey, we need you to go out to some jazz clubs and write about it. Their perspective is whack. They have no idea what they're talking about. What they really should do is come find one of us professionals to go out and write about the scene or the clubs, because we're the ones who know. These guys are just lay people who don't. And we could, but the problem is, it's like it's LA Times and New York Times. So everyone's reading that. And those people who don't know might take on those perspectives. That's why when you have the Just Jazz .tv or the Jazz Journalists Association with all of these different writers and you guys putting together this book, this gives people a perspective that they can look and read upon and go, oh, and they can take this one to heart because they know it's a bunch of photographers and journalists and art authors who are well versed in the sound and the color and the texture of this music. We spent time with the artists, we've interviewed the artists, we know the artists, and we know the music. You know, once you, what do they say? Once you spend 10,000 hours in something, you become a pro. All of us have spent thousands and thousands, way over 10,000 hours investing ourselves in this music. We not only hear it, but we speak to the artist, we write about it, and our perspectives are valid. So, you know, right on for the Jazz Journalists Association for sure. Howard, I'd like to hear your voice on that.
No, thanks very much, Leroy. I mean, one of the great features about this book to me is that, yes, it's got 90 different contributors. So there's so many entry points to it that it works for some young person or, casual person who doesn't really know jazz and just wants to leaf through and they can get a little snatch of this and maybe they found that person's name before, heard about that musician. Many entry points into the music here, many perspectives, different ways that it's written about studiously, casually, humorously, anecdotally, straight ahead question answer things. And it's also really great for aficionados. Everybody's going to find something in here they haven't read before. A specialized article, like David mentioned, the Nate Chinin, the Ted Gioia, the Ted Pankin that you'd have to be digging into Downbeat to find, or my piece that you'd have to go to a website for. And so I think there's something for people to argue about, something for people to learn about. It is a snapshot of the period. It's a snapshot of the kinds of people, which are very diverse, who've been covering this music or interested in it, different ways of covering music and the arts. It sort of positions jazz within the larger culture. Ashley's piece about people going to Europe, Willard's piece about Black people feeling embodied, empowered, to take this music on as they should be. I mean, everybody's got a different perspective here, and there's so many ways in and out and around within the table of contents. I'm really glad we did this. I think that it's really a good look at 20 years of music and 20 years of writing, and I hope it's predictive. I hope it gives people a sense that these kinds of anthologies are of value, that they can be collections that give us a little bit of a vision of what we've just been through and where we're going, and we have more jazz journalism to read and to view and to listen to get something out of this music. It's deep music. It's fun. You can buzz about it a lot. So
No doubt. I think it's
Yeah, I just wanted to interject one quick in defense of the New York Times. I have read a fair share of obituaries that they cover. So
I think
tongue,
obituaries
I
are
would
great.
say that the Times
tongue
has
in
this
cheek,
pretty
I hope.
interesting. Times has this pretty interesting series, 5 minutes to make you love this and that. I think the most recent one was Betty Carter. That one
Yeah.
was curated by Marcus Moore. I got to participate in my first one a couple of weeks ago about big band jazz. Giovanni Russinello was curating that, but there are about 20 of them. And, LA Times, I can't speak to. They used to have a pretty good reviewer out there.
No
His name
more.
was Chris something. I can't remember his name.
But I should say about the New York Times and the obits that the last piece in the book is the obituary of George Wein by Peter Keepnews, who works on the New York Times obituary desk. So we kind of covered that aspect of it.
Yeah, and my comment wasn't even criticism of the Times as much as just the reality that, they don't have the head count. it's not, there's just no one doing it. The classical beat on the, it's not what it used to be. The business has changed, and we have the ability now to give voice to folks who could never dream of having a book published or being in the New York Times. That we could, jazz is about democracy, and I think we can democratize the press as well and give more people an opportunity to have an audience to share their perspectives and their insights into the music that we love.
Well, I think it's fantastic. You have so many different perspectives in this book. I think that's what makes it, really one of the most valuable, because it's not one person's perspective who wrote all this. It's so many contributors. So that lets you get into the minds of each one of these journalists and kind of find their perspective. Either you agree with it, you like it, you disagree with it, but you're going to find something that you love. And even when you agree about things, it's always a positive thing, because you're learning. At least you learn that other perspective. If you don't think that way, at least now you can see how this person's thinking. You have something to say about it. But when you talk about jazz, I mean, we can ask 1,000 people about jazz and get 1,000 different answers. It's really hard to describe what this word jazz means. I don't even think it can be defined, especially in this day and age when it's growing, it's blossoming out. We have different cultures. We have mashups of different genres, and I mean, even on my radio show, it's very, very eclectic. And you can have some opera in there, some chamber music, some hip hop, some some avant-garde. I mean, that's kind of where my mind is with the music all over the place. But I still think it falls under this umbrella of jazz. But really, there's really no way for I'd like to hear from one of you. How would you define jazz to someone who doesn't like it? Maybe they grew up on rock or R&B, and they didn't spend any time listening to jazz. They could be 50 years old now. When you come talk to them about jazz, they don't have a clue. What would you tell them?
Well, that's
you
what the
said
Times.
you said it yourself. You can ask 100 different people what jazz is and come up with 100 different answers.
True, and it's like I if I tell them, I'm going to tell them from my perspective, but I'm sure I missed out on a few things that they need to know. I guess when you ask me where to start out, maybe I'll give you some Horace Silver, or I'll give you all of the elements to start, your platform. But it's really hard for us all to define what we call this word jazz. Some people actually hate the word jazz. They can't stand it. A lot of our musicians today don't want to even use the word jazz. And, it's all called all kind of things. Black American music, Black classical music, no one wants to be put in a box, but we know how we feel when we hear this music called jazz.
I think it's music that has life to it. It's when the music has life to it. That's jazz, It's getting down.
I like that. Music with life.
I wouldn't define it, but if anyone was asking me about the music, I would sit them down, play Louis Armstrong strutting with some barbecue, and watch their face and their feet. And if they weren't digging it, I don't want to know them. Because I think anyone who's never heard the music would listen to that and immediately fall in love with it.
I took my 8-year-old grandson to the Hollywood Bowl in August to see 3 big bands: the Clayton Hamilton Band, the Basie Big Band, and Maria Schneider's orchestra. And it was not just a glorious night under the stars with Grandpa eating junk food, but he really digs Basie. And we drove home singing smack dab in the middle. And I found a question, a T-shirt of questionable intellectual property online of Count Basie that he now proudly wears. So hopefully he's on his way. He got the vibe. And
well, it takes that kind of exposure.
Yes.
Because I have a 10-year-old grandson who's been going to jazz festivals since he was 3 months old, and is now playing the trombone and is thoroughly into the music, and is always constantly singing the jazz tunes that he's hearing on the radio. So, it takes that exposure,
Good job, brother. Well, I think that children are key. And one of the things that children have that many adults don't have anymore is being open. I was telling somebody about, hey, I'm going to see Archie Shepp, this, that, and the other. And this person didn't know much about jazz at the time, many, many years ago. And she said, like, well, I'm open. And I realized that someone who says that they're open, that's even better than somebody says, oh, I love jazz. I'm like, the people who say they love jazz have a very confined version of what they know about it. They have their history, they have their knowledge, and they're the masters of that. But you want to talk to anything outside of that circle, they don't know. Children are open. People who don't know jazz are open to our perspectives. And I think that the Jazz Omnibus is a way to get into some of those different perspectives to let our music grow.
Absolutely.
And
Amen. Amen.
maybe in a few weeks we
Yeah.
can look at the work with fresh eyes and think about
Yeah.
what we've missed,
Yeah.
and think about how we can include our impure thoughts in another venture.
Yeah, and then do a part 2 of this podcast. Guys, I'm going to have to run. Leroy, thank you so much for covering
Love you,
this.
Ashley.
Yeah, love you guys. Stay well, everyone.
Thank you all so much for being a part
Take
of
care, Ashley.
this fantastic collective. We will see you on the next version. The Jazz Omnibus comes out tomorrow. That's October the 15th. Make sure you get your purchase, whether it's digital, whether it's hard copy, whether it's soft copy. You've talked to a bunch of contributors here today. A bunch of authors and photographers and musicians are in the book, so you get many, many perspectives on this thing we call jazz. Thank you guys so much for being a part today. Thank you for watching this episode of the Just Jazz Cafe. Make sure to stay tuned in to the Just Jazz television networks for all things jazz.